One of the options for First Hill and Capitol Hill that we presented at our first round of public meetings in December, we call two-way Broadway with Park Loop, where we come northbound on Broadway and then we take Madison to 11th and loop around Cal Anderson Park. And this was developed partly thinking about what we were hearing from some stakeholders on 12th Avenue and at Seattle University, that this might be a way to bring some additional service to them. Thinking about the Pike Pine corridor and its east-west orientation, that a couplet might work well there. And then also thinking about how we would accommodate bikes and parking and all the uses on Broadway, which is fairly narrow. And here's an image of what 11th might look like with a streetcar, and then the streetcar terminus at Denny by the Nagel Place entrance to the light rail station. However, we heard, as you heard in the public comment portion of today's meeting, there were a lot of concerns from the community about that approach of looping around the park. So we have rolled our sleeves back up in terms of looking again at two-way Broadway, and I don't have a cross-section in the PowerPoint, but we can talk more about ways that bikes could be accommodated on two-way Broadway. We had actually come up with two concepts, and there's a third concept now that I wish I had a slide of it for you, that the community council representative spoke of earlier, involving a two-way cycle track. So we'll be looking at each of those in terms of how do we put the streetcar on Broadway, but also make sure that biking still works on Broadway, because we're trying to have all of the, walking, biking, and riding transit being important pieces of how we make livable communities, so they all need to work together.
I think that illustration may be in the material that was emailed to us by the Capitol Hill Community Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
No, Community Council, excuse me. It does show the two-way bike path.
Okay.
What's that do not sign that appears on Madison?
That's just a reminder as we go through these of where the light rail station would have been. So it's just sort of a helpful point of reference, we thought, as we look at different alignment alternatives, recognizing that the origins of the project were about replacing that light rail station, and clearly a streetcar is not the same as a deep tunnel station of a subway portion of a light rail line. So they're going to accomplish different things. A subway tunnel gives you great speed and reliability, brings you to one point, and a streetcar is an urban circulator that isn't as fast but gets you to a lot of different destinations. But it's still helpful, we think, to kind of be aware of that point of reference. So that's what that is on each of these images.
Yeah, Ethan, in all of these scenarios, is the expectation if someone's commuting to this dense job center, primarily hospital-based, but also, I guess, Seattle University, if they were coming from outside this immediate service area, they would be using the bus system or Sound Transit and then taking the streetcar to this destination?
Yes, although it also could be the case that perhaps they got to their initial destination on First Hill. Let's take, for example, somebody who works on First Hill. They may or may not use the streetcar as part of their commute trip, and then still may use it during the day to go to a meeting or go to lunch or a variety of other purposes.
Well, I guess what buried in that first question is, will any of these configurations contribute to greater usage of the Sound Transit light rail?
Well, I mean, that's part of what we're going to be analyzing, and one of the key factors there is the travel time comparison between the alignments. The other is how close are the stops located to trip generators. So we'll have information on both of those, right?
And what are the plans with regard to the Metro bus routes? Once this is operational, will it affect routing or schedules at all of Metro?
We are not proposing that we are going to be driving service changes. We are assuming that we need to design this in a way that's compatible with existing bus service. Now, there could be future discussions that start to explore that, but it's not an assumption of the project that we change any current Metro service.
Well, one thing I'd be interested in knowing about then is how do the buses, if Metro's continuing to serve these streets, how do they get around the streetcar? How does it affect the electric buses?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sounds rather complex, but maybe you have it all figured out.
Well, we can talk about that, and it will vary with some of these alignments, okay. But clearly we have to solve that for any of the alignments if they're going to be able to move forward. So this Boren-Seneca alignment, which is actually it's a couplet of Boren and Minor to Seneca, was developed in response to a request from the First Hill Improvement Association to look at an alignment that included stop locations further west on First Hill where they see some trip generators, including Virginia Mason, and some of the high-rise residential is also further west.
If you're going to be changing or modifying any of these illustrations, one thing I would ask you to include when there's a little bit of space to do it is arrows that show which direction people will be going.
And we do have, I should note that these are really, what we're working with here in this presentation, these are actually just graphics. Mm-hmm. We also have concept level engineering drawings, which do include those arrows and more detail, and they actually show exactly where the track would be in the street to scale. Okay. They're rather large files and difficult to work with in a PowerPoint, mm-hmm. but that's what we use primarily in the public meetings. We have large boards that have that level of detail, and they're also all on our website.
Okay.
Could you, when you provide information, note what the travel time would be from King Street Station to the nearest stop by Swedish, or the
yes,
First Hill Hospital Complex?
What we did for the first round of meetings and the first presentation of this, we provided some travel time information for sort of two major segments. So we were comparing across these alignments the travel time from about 12th and Jackson to the Capitol Hill Station, and then the travel time on the other segments. What we were asked to do, and I thought it was a really good suggestion by some community stakeholders, is another way to look at travel time, which would be from sort of a midpoint of the system to either of the endpoints. So that's something that's going to be new information in the next round of meetings. And so we'll use, we're planning to use Marion Street as that midpoint for any of these alignments, which is, as you described, close to Swedish. Just continuing through the alignments, and then we can continue with questions on them. We're also looking at a proposal that came from Seattle University and some 12th Avenue stakeholders called the Broadway 12th Avenue Couplet, northbound on Broadway and southbound on 12th. And then finally, we have an alignment that is somewhat a hybrid of the others. That's two-way Broadway until Boylston Street, which is about the midpoint on First Hill, and then a little bit of a swing west. So something that combined elements of some of the other proposals. So those are the alignments that we're looking at the moment. And we'll be comparing the capital and operating costs for these, the streetcar travel time, the ridership potential. That I would say is, I don't anticipate that'll be a forecast per se at this point, but really a representation of the ridership potential based on how close are the stops to the major trip generators. We'll be looking at bike integration as a key criteria. How how successfully can we integrate bikes and provide for safe travel on a bike with the different alignments, urban design opportunities, economic development potential, the utility and construction impacts, and the extent of traffic and parking revisions that might be required to make an alignment work.
Okay. Well, those are